Years ago I thought, what is the definition of entertainment? Well, it's not just escapism; it's engagement, right? And so I think a story that engages in a riveting way, it stimulates the imagination, it fuels your curiosity, and you still have to be thinking about the brand of storytelling and the steps along the narrative path that make something engrossing, that keep your interest, that sustain the suspense, that work, that develop the narrative questions. But one of the things that I've just tried to do my entire career is just understand the subtle differences of all these genres and tones. And I think it's another thing that I'm really loving about going this next step. Did a lot of projects based on real events. Going this next step and actually making a verite documentary, which is something I hope to do much more of, and yet applying what I've learned about storytelling and ways of conveying feelings, ideas, and emotions to audiences. And I find that they're a little more related than I even would have guessed they might be.
And you can just have Jim Carrey narrate it. It'll be fine.
We still want to do Jim Carrey doing all of that. I mean, and so like a lot of folks, my first set of relatives, they came out unscathed out of what was called the car fire in Reading. Big fire, big portion of the town destroyed, not the whole town. And then shortly, Paradise is on fire. And this time 95% of the town is destroyed. And I was just, in my own distant way, kind of shell-shocked. But like a lot of people, you get numb to seeing these images, right? But I began to just wonder how you cope with this thing, and that's the question. That's the only question. And I've really enjoyed, getting into the documentary world. I find it fascinating. I find it really, satisfying. But I've never made a verite doc, and I went to Justin Wilkes and Sarah Bernstein, who run our documentary group at Imagine, and said, what's it going to be to rebuild? And rebuilding Paradise. What will that be? And they said, well, let's send some cameras and begin to find out. So I went with the crews. Crews came in, and we began to follow, individual stories and begin to try to answer that question without knowing that it would ultimately, to a very large extent, be a story of resilience. But this is not the kind of thing where you're sitting around with your writer and your studio heads and your producers and eventually the actors, figuring out what the themes are and how you're gonna shape the story to deliver on a premise. This is discovering it, and this is what we found, among other things.
Ron, I was a test audience for Backdraft.
Oh my God! Were you in that audience that rated it 30%?
Too much fun.
We had a horrible test screening on Backdraft.
I thought it was a tremendous movie, actually. And I'm just wondering, how did you put your actors through all that? A lot of CGI, it's just
that was pre-CGI.
That
was all live.
Thing.
Yeah, that was all analog. That was all live fire, and of course with a lot of care taken, and thank God no injuries. One singed eyebrow was all that we got out. But the actors, were courageous, but we were careful. We had a fire lab for about a month where we learned, how we could control it on a set with burners and what fuels to use and how we could shoot it, what camera speeds to work with, and how we could make it as safe as possible to give the illusion that actors were in it. But when you have a guy like Kurt Russell, he says, well, illusion? Fuck that. Just throw some Zell gel on my face. I'm going in.
Yeah.
So I benefited from that too.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, Ron Howard.